Okay, hi everyone. My name is Caitlin Turner, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about counseling addictive families and a treatment model that is useful to do that in therapy. So, just a little outline of what my presentation will be. So, this presentation is going to focus on the sequential family addictions model, and I'm going to introduce that model and summarize the meaning of the model in family counseling and addictions. I'll also be providing some critiques of the model, some pros and some cons. And by the end of this presentation, you will be able to summarize the model and understand its importance to family and addictions. So first off, I just have a little video that just shows the impact of addiction and how that impacts the entire family system. So I'll play that right now.
My family, like millions of other families, has been greatly impacted by addiction. For years, we hid in the shadows, isolating ourselves, lying to our closest friends about the chaos that was ensuing in our home behind closed doors. It took a lot of courage for my parents to admit that they didn't know how to help one of their children. When we went out looking for professional help, we found that some of the professionals were more than willing to take advantage of the desperate situation that we were in. They also preached an antiquated ideology. We clung to these beliefs, and as a result, my brother's condition continued to deteriorate. We had internalized two of the great fallacies that family members are often taught: that we were responsible for my sibling's condition, and that we were powerless in our ability to help him. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth.
Addiction is often referred to as a family disease. Family members play a central role in the lives of many individuals with substance use disorders. Decades of research have shown that addiction treatment results in better health outcomes when family members are involved. When a family member starts using drugs or alcohol in an unhealthy way, many families don't know what to do. The individual using substances may begin to prioritize drugs or alcohol over relationships and engage in behavior that's out of character. Family members may begin to feel neglected and confused. Relationships with family members can become strained, and family dynamics change. Often, family members with no formal education or support must provide life-sustaining care in the home. Family members impacted by a loved one's substance use are at high risk for developing chronic health and psychiatric conditions. There is evidence that the health of affected family members correlates with the severity of their loved one's substance use disorder. Affected family members are high utilizers of the healthcare system. It is likely that family members will seek care for themselves before their loved one with a substance use disorder. Primary care providers are in an ideal position to identify and educate families impacted by addiction. Providers should be aware of the evidence-based supports available to family members, as well as evidence-based treatment for substance use disorders. Providers should be aware that information and education provided to family members can greatly influence health outcomes for all family members. Meet Karen, a 50-year-old mom of 3. Karen goes to see her primary care provider, Dr. Bob, because her tension headaches are getting worse. Dr. Bob spends most of the visit focused on Karen's headaches. Karen shares with Dr. Bob that her youngest son is using heroin. In response to her disclosure, he expresses sympathy, but does not offer any education or resources. Desperate for guidance on how to help her family, Karen attends a peer-led support group where she receives advice from other well-meaning parents. Karen finds comfort in their company and feels less isolated and ashamed. However, Karen does not realize that much of the advice she's been given is not evidence-based and actually harmful to the recovery of her entire family.
Okay, so I hope that video was informative and it just showed you how addiction really is a family disease and that addiction doesn't just affect the person who is struggling, it also affects everyone in the family system, such as Karen in the example in the video. Okay, so next, this is an image of the sequential family addictions model. So this is kind of a breakdown of what it looks like from stage one, sorry, all the way until stage 7. I'll talk more about the stages soon. So here's a little introduction to the model. So the sequential family addiction model is one approach that can be used in addiction treatment. It's not the only one, but it is a model that is frequently used. And this model was introduced not too long ago. It was introduced in 2006. And this model just acknowledges how family, meaning individual members' attachment and relationships, as well as overall dynamics, impacts the person with the addiction. So kind of like the video was talking about how like I said before, addiction is not just a one individual person disease, it kind of affects everyone in the system. So all of these things intertwined can have a great effect on the person with the addiction and actually can keep the person still using. So this model is a little different from other treatment models because it kind of makes sure that every member takes ownership and responsibility on how they're contributing to the addiction. And it focuses on how effective communication and interactions from the past and the present can have an effect on that person's reality. So it's really important that change occurs and that you change those unhealthy dynamics and make them a little healthier to try to help that person with the addiction, break free from the addiction and recover. And like I showed before in the image of the model, it's broken down into 7 stages, and all of them are pretty significant. One of them is optional, but I'll explain that in a minute. So stage one really focuses on change. And if you want that change, individuals have to want the change too. So it kind of relates to the saying where it says an addict, has to want to go to recovery for themselves, not just for their family. Because if you don't really want something for yourself, you're not going to do it. So, like I said before, in addiction, it's not solely on the person who's addicted to change. It's important that every family member looks at their dynamics and how they're contributing to the addiction and try to change them in positive ways. In stage one, the counselor will kind of use motivational interviewing techniques, and that's conducted to be able to just provide support for the family to want to have that change. And during these interviewing techniques, it will be able to address ambivalent feelings that family members might have about substance use or in general. And typically, this process takes about 1 to 2 sessions. It's not too long. Um, and next, so in stage 2, the counselor will work with the family to be able to think about how things may be different. So, kind of painting a different picture than what your reality is, and how that life could be different if that addiction did not exist in the family system. So this is where solution focused methods are used, and it's encouraged that all family members who are attending the session participate in this. So just thinking about relationships, thinking about housing arrangements, goals, and dreams of all the family members are discussed. So you kind of get a picture of what their perfect or ideal life would be if the addiction didn't occur. And this typically takes 3 to 7 sessions. So during stage 3, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is really a main focus, and the counselor will help the family members properly identify their thoughts and their trigger behaviors, and they'll be provided tools and techniques to change those thought patterns. So a lot of times family members don't even realize things they're saying or how they're reacting to that person with the addiction is actually triggering them and not helping them, and they're actually contributing to that addiction continuing when they think they're trying to stop it. Again, in this stage, all family members are encouraged to participate because it's important that every family member realize their thoughts and their trigger behaviors so that they can change them. Otherwise, it could be harder for the addict to be successful in their recovery. And this is a longer stage. The stage could take 3 to 11 sessions. So stage 4, it's focused on how to have more positive communication and dynamics in the family structure, which is kind of what the first 3 stages were doing as well. This is where the counselor will use the family system theory, and the family will be able to learn how to function in the structure, and they'll be able to implement a healthy and robust system where the family functions are more positive, one where dysfunctional and harmful speech are no longer existing. So again, changing those triggering behaviors and those thoughts. And this can take 5 to 10 sessions. So next is stage 5. During this stage, the counselor will help the family learn how to differentiate. So this process will help the family members separate their thoughts from their feelings. And these thoughts and feelings can also be carried down through generations. Just like addiction can be generational. So if someone generations ago has these thoughts and these behaviors about addiction, it can lead into your family structure now and how you're treating that person who's struggling with that addiction. Um, so being able to differentiate will help each member begin to separate themselves from their family and kind of be able to have their own response and not think about how generations have passed down to be able to have their own thoughts and feelings about addiction. And this can take 5 to 10 sessions. So stage 6, they say stage 6 is an optional stage because it does place an importance on trauma and traumatic events. But sometimes focusing on those traumas isn't always beneficial. Sometimes it can be harmful, not only to the addict, but to the family members as well. So if family members do choose to participate in this stage, they can just reflect on some childhood experiences and they can start creating healthy emotional responses to them because oftentimes addiction does happen as a response to trauma. So typically it's kind of how people cope. So if they learn how to create um, a more healthy response, that could be better for them. So stage 7 is a stage that can be reached and there still could be addiction in the family when you reach the last stage. During this model, it doesn't mean that the addiction is going to be cured and that the family system is going to be cured. But during this stage, the counselor should have been able to provide all family members a bunch of different techniques to use and have some healthy reflections, and hopefully their behaviors would have changed in a more positive way and their thoughts would have changed in a more positive way. So this focuses on how family members need contact with each other to form emotionally beneficial relationships. And this is a long-term stage, and it can last at least 15 sessions. But it's really just important at this stage that family members at least have made a dent in change and are starting to realize their behaviors and how they could be enabling, and they're willing to start changing them at this point. So here's some strengths and pros of the model. So some strength is that addiction is addressed through a wider lens during this model, and it helps the family come to terms with the idea of addiction, and it can help them make the changes needed to help the person who's struggling with addiction. And also all family members are included during this model, which oftentimes can be helpful because it takes that spotlight off the person struggling with the addiction, and it shows them that this is everyone disease, that everyone is included in this and can help. All voices are able to be heard, and treating addiction in the family system as a whole, it can lead to long-lasting change because only focusing on 2 or 3 or just one individual isn't helpful. It's really important that when that person struggling with addiction goes back into their environment and goes back around their family system, that there's a better structure and there's positive change and there's better behaviors that can help them stay in recovery and not relapse. And it also just promotes emotional regulations, like I talked about before. Just finding those healthy emotional responses and not always being so defensive can be helpful. Some weaknesses of the model, it can lead to traumas being exposed that now the family member is not ready to explore, such as like stage 6 that was optional because it does focusing on trauma. There's also no guarantee at the end of all the stages that addiction will not be present, like I said before. And there's no guarantee that all family members will be willing to change or make that change everlasting after, they're done with the model. So I have another video here, and I'll just play a little bit of it to kind of wrap up.
One of the first things I like to do when I start working with new parents is to help them get clear about how addictive behavior affects the entire family system. I have this presentation I call the 8-second lecture on chemical dependency. It goes something like this. Here's the addict. Here's the addict's chemical. Addiction is this person's life begins to revolve around the use of the chemical. It's that simple. My experience is that usually by the time I'm done drawing this circle, family members are starting to nod and they say, yep, that's it. And then I'll say, since we saved so much time on that, we can move ahead to the 8-second lecture on codependency, which goes something like this. And unfortunately, this person has other people in his life. And the 8-second lecture on codependency is these people's lives begin to revolve around this person's life, which is revolving around the use of the chemical. What kind of day these people have depends on what kind of day this guy has, which depends on his relationship with the mood-altering substance at the time. They are, in a sense, codependent. And that's codependency at its most base definition. You can't argue with that. And again, it's my experience that when I draw that second circle, family members start really nodding. They really get that one. You may be having that experience right now as you're seeing this for the first time. But we also need to go a little further and take a look at what's going on emotionally here. Anytime there's an addiction in a family system, there are going to be a lot of unresolved feelings that can easily end up getting displaced. The people around the substance user are going to be angry, they're hurt, they're scared. Some of them might be feeling guilty or ashamed. And again, those are just the feelings that are directly related to the substance user. But then there's also going to be a lot of stuff going on between the individual family members. The diagram here shows a real common dynamic we see when the client's a teen or a young adult, and that's the parents who aren't on the same page as far as how they're dealing with the issue. You know, one's usually the tough guy and one's usually the enabler, and that can end up causing some pretty significant problems in their relationship. Or on the other hand, if the substance user is an adult in the family, there's a ton of different ways that relationships are damaged. Kids might be mad at the other parent for allowing the problem to continue. Or the kids could be mad thinking that the other parent's being too mean by making mom or dad go to treatment, and they end up choosing sides. And then it's not uncommon to see that kind of alignment or triangulation go on throughout the family. Adult siblings stop talking to each other. In-laws might chime in with their opinion about what's going on. So you see what this can end up looking like. Then we can't leave out the person who's actually at the center of all this. Even though they're identified as one who's causing all the problems, they've got feelings too. They're probably angry, mostly because of how the people around them are responding to their behavior. But underneath that, there's a good chance they're scared because on some level, they probably realize that they keep messing up and they're not able to stop. And they're not sure that they're ever going to be able to change. Add to that, then they probably got some guilt and shame about their behavior, but they're sure not going to let on to that. Then there's the underlying issues that might be the whole reason that they're using in the first place. And the bottom line is this whole family system becomes just a mess of unresolved feelings. And that's what we've got when a family enters into treatment. And so the value of this 8-second lecture on codependency is that while it might not be real pleasant to see it there in black and white as to what's going on in the family, it at least offers an explanation for how we got there. And with that explanation comes a solution. And you can see by this illustration that the first thing for the family members to do is to step back and remove yourself from this dynamic of being controlled by unhealthy behavior. A lot of you have already taken the first step in this process by addressing the problem and helping your loved one get into treatment. That's a good beginning, but it's not taking back your control completely. This is going to continue to get tested as you deal with different situations over the course of treatment. Ultimately, you're going to see that it's a process of you learning how to identify, set, and maintain healthy boundaries.
Okay.
One of the first things I like to do.
And so these are just some journal article findings, some quotes I found that I thought would be helpful and kind of make that connection between, the sequential model and family and addictions counseling. So this one just says the family remains the primary source of attachment, nurturing, and socialization for humans in our current society. Therefore, the impact of substance use disorders on the family and individual family members merits attention. Each family and each family member is uniquely affected by the individual using substances, including but not limited to having unmet developmental needs, impaired attachment, economic hardship, legal problems, emotional distress, distress, and sometimes violence being perpetrated against him or her. And one more. The fight against alcohol and substance addiction is a lifelong process, and it is necessary to give psychological support to family members, since family is the most important source of support for addicts during this process. Related literature shows that medical treatment given in health facilities is not alone sufficient to provide a long-term solution, and psychological and social support should be given to addicts with the inclusion of parents into the rehabilitation process. And then last but not least, I have some handouts that will be linked also with my presentation. This one just talks about helping a loved one dealing with mental or substance use disorders and some factors that you can take into account. And then this one just shows how to support one dealing with substance use disorders as a family member. And again, here's the link to them, and I will link them when I upload my presentation. These are my references, and that is it. Thank you so much for listening.